I've made a series of videos aimed at making some Christmas decor out of coffee filters. The first one I did was how to make coffee filter poinsettia, and there's an example of a couple here. I've also done videos on how to make coffee filter Christmas roses and how to make a slightly different style of hydrangea that would fit in with a Christmas decor. This video is going to show you how to make Christmas roses. So I'm going to start by dyeing the coffee filters, and for these Christmas roses I'm going to use this gel icing substance in ivory. It doesn't look very ivory when you look at it in the pot, it looks quite brown, and you only need a tiny little bit to get to the colour that we need. I've got 400 millilitres of water in my bowl, it's warm, and I'm just going to put just the tiniest bit on the end of my knife in the water. As you can see, it's changing the colour quite dramatically already with just that tiny little bit. I just want to take the bright whiteness off the coffee filters, so I want them to go actually a proper ivory colour. And because I don't want to get my hands filthy, I've popped my marigolds on, and I'm just going to stir that around to try and get that gel absorbed into the water. Okay, that's done. I'm going to take 6 coffee filters because that's how many I can put comfortably on my baking tray. So I'm going to dunk them in all at once, and you'll see how quickly they absorb that water. So I'm just going to move them around a little bit. The colour change here is not going to be dramatic, it is just to make sure that we've got the colour we need. And then I'm going to unfold them. And lay them one by one on my baking sheet. And here are those batch of coffee filters cooked in the oven, 175 fan, for no more than 3 minutes, but just watch them till you get them as you would like. And you can see the difference in the colour between the white, just very subtle. Having dyed a batch of coffee filters in the ivory, I've done the same with a set of coffee filters in green, and I do find that it saves time if you do these in a batch. It depends on the final look that you want. You may wish to hand paint each individual leaf to get a more realistic look, but a good starting point is to dye a batch of coffee filters green, and for those I've just used the leaf green in these Wilton icing gel colours. There are several different types of green. There's a moss green there that's a bit duller green but also more subtle, and then a Kelly green that's really quite vibrant. But I've gone with the leaf green for these. And what I've done is a pattern for myself of 4 different shapes of petals, slightly differently, and 3 different shapes and sizes of leaf. The leaves I'm not going to do anything more with other than I took my coffee filter that was already dyed, folded it in half again, and then depending on the size of your leaf you can either fold it in again and again, or once you've got it in quarters, fold it into 3 and then use your little pattern excuse me, to cut out the shapes that you need. For each petal and each leaf you'll need 2 of the shapes that you pull out, mainly just to give it that bit of rigidity. For each Christmas rose you're going to need 5 petals. I've got 4 different shapes here of my petals, just to give it a little bit of variety. If I can work out how to do it, I'll pop a pattern of this as a PDF or a picture in the description of this video. But I've got 4 petals there to play with, and I'll pick any 5 random ones to create the rose, just to give it a bit more of a natural look. But before we start to assemble it, there's one more step we need to do to make these Christmas roses a little bit more realistic, and that is to add a little bit of colour to the centre of these petals. So remember I said first of all that you need 2 of each of these shapes to form a petal. So here I've got 4 petals lined up. These just happen to be the same pattern, but I will do this technique that I'm going to show you with each of these different shapes of petals, so that I've got plenty of selection of petals to work with. All we need to do to add that realistic look to these Christmas roses is to add a little bit of green. So I'm using that leaf green. I've got some water in my egg tray, and I'm going to add just a tiny little bit of colour to that. Now looking at that, I think that might even be too deep for what I need. I'm just going to check, because in the centre of the Christmas roses the petals fade to a greeny colour right in the centre. Well, that's probably going to be okay. So all I want to do for that realism is to add a bit of that green to the centre of each flower. So all I'm going to do is to add this colour to the base of each petal, and as you can see that's all I'm doing right to the tip. This is, sorry, the base of the petal. In order to make the leaves we need 2 of the same shape. Then we're going to sandwich between those a piece of wire. And this wire, as you can see, it's very fine. I can show you that there. It's wire that's used by cake makers when they're making flowers for an iced cake. So it's very, very fine. You can use floristry stub wires. It just needs to be very fine. I like this because it's green, so I don't need to think about covering the wire with a stem tape. So what I'm going to do now is take some of my PVA glue, whichever you're using, pop your wire down the centre. They will act as a rib for the leaf. Once you've got it in place and it's behaving itself, add the other one to the top, getting as close as you can so that the two match. Doesn't matter if they don't. The main thing is to get that wire sandwiched between the two and to get it sealed at the bottom and round the sides. And when they dry, you gently peel them off. Something quite satisfying about this. Now if you find you've got a little bit of glue on the outside, just trim that off. And also if you find that, can you perhaps see there on that one, they aren't exactly aligned up, just trim that as well. The good thing about this is that you don't want each petal to be exactly the same, because it wouldn't be like that in nature, not exactly. So where you have that little bit of extra on the outside, just trim that off. I'm going to show you now how to make the central section of the Christmas roses. It consists of 3 elements, and I'm going to show you how to do each of these. The first section, I'm going to take a piece of thin wire. This is wire that is used for making flowers in cake making. So they're very, very fine, but it's absolutely ideal for this particular project. I'm just going to take you in a little bit there. I'm going to take a piece of wire. This is probably shorter than I would normally use. I would normally say it is about 8 inches long, normally. I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to use some white floristry tape and just tape the end of it. Just wrap that tape 3 or 4 times around the end of it and twist it so that tape is stuck. And then snip it off. What you're looking for is a pointy tip, a slight flat bit in the middle, and then tapering off at the other end. It is tiny and it will be surrounded by other things. I don't know whether you can see that there. Is it a bit blurred? You do the same the other end. Hold it tight. 1, 2, 3. And then twist it. Try to get it so you can't see the green at the top. If you can a little bit, it doesn't really matter. And then having got that, you simply bend that in half, have one bit slightly higher than the other, and twist it. And that's your first segment. So that's using the very thin wire and white floristry tape. What I tend to do is to take a section of tape and cut it in half. You don't need to use the full width of that. For the second section, I'm using a light green floristry tape. Cut a section off and cut it in half. And all I'm going to do with this is to twist it. Keep on twisting it, and at the same time, once you've twisted it, run your fingers down it so it's sort of sticking itself together. Just continue all the way down. Giving it a final pull through so you've got something that's like a green wire. It isn't a wire, it's just that floristry tape. And all I'm going to do is to bend it into the shape of a little stamen and snip it off. And I'm going to do 5 of these for each centre. I would say it's probably about 1 inch long. You can see the size of it relative to my thumb. Oh. Five. The next bit is the fun bit, just to finish those off. What I want to do is to give them a little golden bit at the end. All I do is to dip them in glue and then dip them in some turmeric. I have tried this with the flocking that you can get for nail art that comes in a range of different colours. But 1, you only get a little tiny bit of that. 2, it's more expensive and you have to order it in, whereas with your pot of turmeric you may well have that in your store cupboard, but certainly 1 big pot of turmeric like this is going to last you forever if you're doing this particular project. So again, just get the ends in the glue and in there. It almost looks like when bees are collecting pollen. If you've ever seen a bee, they collect the pollen in their little knees, get covered in pollen. Well, these are the bee's knees of this project. There you are. So you've now got the first 2 sections of the central section ready to assemble. The final one is where we're going to make what look like fake eyelashes for a pantomime dame. I'm going to use that turmeric again, but for this just take one of your coffee filters. I've folded mine into quarters and I'm just going to snip probably about 3/4 of an inch, 1.5 centimetres around the edge. This is going to give you a long strip to play with. You won't need all of that, so I'm going to cut that in half. You may find that you don't want to use all of that for your central section. I probably do with mine, but you can make them as fat or as thin as you like. The main thing you need to do next, once you've got your piece, and of course you can use little scraps of coffee filter that you've got left over to do this. I'm just folding this up and I'm going to cut it. My open end there is on the top. I'm just going to turn that over and I'm going to trim the curved edge. And I'm going to snip it probably about 1 millimetre and a bit more. What I would say is you don't need to go too far down. Probably looking here at about 1 centimetre's worth, and it doesn't necessarily have to be too thin. I've tried doing this where I've laboriously cut these very, very fine, very thin, and it hasn't made a scrap of difference. In fact, I don't think it looks as good. So you're looking for that sort of thickness. And the next bit, this is admittedly a bit messy, but it will be worth it when we get those lovely eyelashes. Just going to create a little bit of space for me here. I've got my little pot of turmeric. I'll just move the camera around a little bit. And I'm going to do it in probably 3 sections. The idea is to put quite a blob of glue on the end and then dip it in the turmeric. So here goes. I'm going to do my first section about 1/3 of the way along. So I've got quite a bit of glue on the bottom, and I'm going to dip that in a little section at a time into that turmeric. And I'm looking to get quite a bit of it on the bottom of that paper. There's nothing subtle about this. I've found that it's better if you get more on. So make sure you've got plenty of glue on. I sort of weave my glue, weave my little eyelashes into the glue back and forth so they're fairly well coated. You see, and lay that down somewhere to dry. Just off camera then, my eyelash split into 2, so I got another section here, but that is not a concern at all, because once you assemble it, there's absolutely no issue at all with using more than one strip. I'm just dunking those in there. I might be running out of turmeric in this little pot. I think it's ready for a good clean out. I'm making sure here that I've got plenty of turmeric on, because that's going to give it that really authentic look of the centre of the Christmas rose. And my tip for you would be, once you've done this and it's fully covered, as you can see there, is to just leave it to dry before you do the next step. So there we have, ready to go, our 3 sections of the centre. We have the very beginning, the inside bit. We have 5 of these little hairpins that will surround that central section, and then we have the eyelashes to complete it. And once assembled, you'll get the centre of your Christmas roses that look like this. I'm ready to assemble one of these Christmas roses now. I've done a little bit of a production line with things that I'm going to need, and what I've got lined up here are the middle stamens, the first line of the middle row of stamens, and here is a selection of the outer stamens. That's just the coffee filter dipped in glue and then dipped in turmeric powder. This next section, I would say, is not hard. It is a little bit fiddly, but it is worth it to get that realistic look in the centre of your Christmas rose. Couple of things I would suggest is, once you've made your outer stamens, your row of outer stamens, just let it dry for a little bit. They are quite sturdy once they are dry, so you don't need to be too delicate with them. Apart from that, I'll just show you how I assemble them. So I'm just going to zoom in so you can see a little bit more clearly. Apart from the pieces that I need, I've just got a little bit of glue on hand. This is just Mod Podge that I'll be using for this. The only other thing you need in this is some florist tape. I've got a dark green colour here, and I tend to cut mine into 2. I think, apart from it being a better use of tape, you get a neater finish. So I'm just going to cut a few pieces. Okay, so now we begin. I'm going to take one of the centres, and then for each one I'm going to take 5 of these little green stamens with the yellow tip. just placing them around that central bit. So the central bit is just sticking up a little bit, and then it's surrounded by those green stamens. See if we can get a close-up of that for you. So I'm just going to hold that in place now with a little bit of floristry tape. Little tip, if you squeeze it like that, you can see which side of the floristry tape is the stickiest. Just positioning those so that central piece is surrounded by the green stamens, and then just moving that down and tying it off. So I'll just do another one, take that central section. I'm going to need 5 of these. That's 2. I'm going to hold those first 2 in place so that I can place the second 2. On the other side. And that's made no difference at all. I may as well just put the 5 together, and then wind it round and part way down your stem. So here we go, we've got those middle bit together. You can twist the stems so that they stay together, and then I'm going to wrap 5 of these little stamens around that central section. Just want to make sure that that's just sticking up just ever so slightly higher than that row, and hold those in place with the floristry tape. I would say this isn't hard, it's just fiddly, and you'll find your own way of doing it. It suits you whether you're right-handed, left-handed, or whatever. So I'm going to take one of the central stamens and I'm going to surround them with the little green stamens, just so that they stick up a little bit at the top. I'm going to hold them in place with a little bit of floristry tape. I just want to get it so that we've got that central little bit that's sticking up slightly, and that where possible those green stamens surround the white centre. So take your middle section and start to wrap the little green stamens around that central point. Okay, and then hold it together with your floristry tape. So there you have your 5 central pieces ready. If you can see those there. And we're now going to add the outer sepals. So if you take one of your strips that you've made, and you'll see that it possibly has a natural leaning one way or another. This looks to me as though it's leaning that way. So I'm going to take my little stamen, add a blob of glue on the end, and where I've put that floristry tape, I'm just going to start to wrap this around. Now at this point, a little tip for you that I think works well is if you turn it upside down, so add a little bit of glue and start to wrap that around. What I tend to find works quite well is if I turn that upside down and work this way. Add a little bit of glue here, ever so often, and then wrap it. I'm holding it tight with that finger and then wrapping it round. I'm trying to keep all the this section level rather than making it go down or up the stem, the central stem. It will build up, but that is perfectly fine because we'll use that later when we're sticking the petals of the rose on. And I just keep rolling until I've got what I think looks like a reasonable centre. I'm going to keep going for a little bit, so I'm going to add a bit more, and I'm going to keep rolling. Keep it as tight as possible. It needs a little bit more. With these Christmas roses, it does look as though that the centre is quite the main feature really. So it's worthwhile spending this little bit of time to get this right. And you can see that I'm not being terribly careful with the bottom section with the pollen on, the fake pollen on. I'm concentrating on keeping that bottom section nice and level. I think we're getting there with that now, just a little bit more. So keep on rolling. I might even use the whole of this strip. I think that's probably enough, so I'm going to snip that off, save that, and just glue it at the end to complete that section. Make sure it's well stuck down. And then leave that to dry for a little bit. So we'll do the same with the next one. I'll try and get this close up for you. So I've applied a little bit of glue to the base of that, and I'm sticking it so that it's covering that floristry tape. And I'm starting to wind it around the base. Now at this stage, I find that it's easier if I tip it upside down. I'm holding it with one finger at one end, and what I'm going to be doing is rolling this up so that the top there stays the same there, but I'm not rolling it down the stem in any way. And as I go, I'm going to apply a little bit of glue there from time to time just to hold it in place. A little bit of glue. So here we go. I'm holding on to the pollen section. I know it's dry, so it's more robust than you think. The most important thing is to hold a bit of tension and to roll that. Keep on rolling. Keep on rolling. Keep it as tight as you can. Keep it as level as you can. A bit more glue for the next section. You can make this central section as small or as big as you like, dependent on your personal preference. Try and stick to something that looks like the original flower that we're trying to replicate. But also it might be that you prefer to have less of a central section or a little bit more. With this one, let's just have a look to see how it's looking now. I think that's not far off. I think I'm going to go to the end of this row here. Keeping it tight. Bit of glue. And finishing off with a bit of glue. With one that I've done before, I've just moved these little stamens out just a little bit, just to give it that raggedy look. What you don't want to do is to show too much of the white paper. Like there. I think that looks, just move that out a little bit so you can see. You can play around with that until you get it looking the way you want to. Okay. So now we're ready to assemble the Christmas rose. I've got 5 petals, 3 leaves, 1 centre and a piece of tape. The only other things I need are the end of a paintbrush or something similar and my trusty glue gun. So first thing I'm going to do is to zoom you in just a little bit so you can see up close. First thing I'm going to do is to just fold over each of these petals. First, the end that we've dyed green goes one way and the opposite end goes the other way, so that we've got a shape that looks like that. So do that for each petal. This just helps with sticking together and with the overall shape. Don't worry about over rolling because you can soon fix that. It's not a permanent thing. So get them all ready with the green tab pointing down that way, and then we're ready to assemble. So take your centre, and where we've wrapped that round, that is where you're going to stick the base of each of these petals. So how I do it, I add a blob of my hot glue gun, my hot glue I should say, on the bottom, and then place the petal like that. You see? And we're going to continue around here, putting each of those 5 petals in that same way. You can see the effect of that curve. Once the glue's cooled down just slightly, I'm just going to manipulate that so that it is a better fit there. So we're ready then to put the next petal, overlapping it a little bit. So next petal, hot glue on that little base that we've made, and then put that on there, overlapping that petal, probably by about 1/4. And just let that glue cool down a little bit before we do the same again, just to bend that around that central stalk, if you like, so it's a better fit. Can you see what we're doing there? Just bending it round there. And continue to do that with each of the 5 petals. Here's number 3 coming in. And we're overlapping it by about 1/4 again. I'm going to let that dry before we do anything else. Can you see how it's building up and how lovely that central green section looks? I think that's cooled a little bit. So I'm just going to squeeze that there again. So I've got 2 more to apply here now. Hot glue. Overlap it by about 1/4. See how it's building up now? Gorgeous. Just bending that round a little before we apply the last one. Final one again is overlapped by perhaps 1/4. And when that glue is a little bit cooler, I'm just going to smooth that, cinch it in a bit so that we've got a nice shaped, it's like a little sepal I suppose at the bottom, but it's just where those petals meet, just to give us a nice little base. And there we have it. You can play around with these to get them in the position you like. The first ones I did, I just crumpled up completely and then uncrumpled to give them a really crumply look. But I think that's probably more authentic Christmas rose. So what we do now is to apply the leaves, and I've got one of each of the 3 shapes. And I've got my trusty floristry tape. So I'm just going to attach them on with this tape. I'm going to find which is the sticky bit, which is that side. Wrap it around the base a little bit. And I'm probably just going to come down about 1 inch before I attach the first leaf. And florists everywhere will be screaming at me now. I'm not a florist, so this is just the way I'm doing it. Second leaf, opposite the first. In fact, I'm going to wrap it round first. And then the longest leaf at the bottom. Just making sure that there's no wire showing at the base of each of those leaves. Twist and pull that stem tape right to the bottom and finish it off. And reposition these leaves so you've got what you're happy with, and there is the completed Christmas rose.